Got me a podcast. I want you to know. Slicing up ear holes. I want you to know. Girl, you're so groovy. We are Columbia House Party.
Yes, that was amazing.
I was laughing before we started.
That kicked
Very
ass.
bad.
No, that rules. You gotta not doubt these. They're all gold.
One of them's been bad. The has one sucked.
They're all solid gold. It's good that you have been thinking about it for like 6 weeks.
Yeah, it hasn't been wearing on me. We never introduced ourselves, by the way.
That's true. I think we did it first.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm Blake Murphy. That's Jake Goldsbie.
What's up?
This is fun. I'm excited for today. We say this every time. Obviously, we pick the album we're excited for.
Yeah.
We're not going to pick an album that we're not excited to do, right?
I know they don't, but it feels like since they reunited in 2004, Pixies play like 320 shows a year.
I saw them at Turf 2015 with Wilco.
So did
which
I.
is how we got the connection here. Also, pretty monumentally important album.
Yeah.
Pretty monumentally important band.
I would say that in the music we are discussing, the music we enjoy, this would be like if there was a Mount Rushmore of important albums, this might be on there.
Yeah, it would.
I'm not going to make a solid declaration that
we'd have to make sure.
But like it's in the conversation for sure.
Yes. So this is kind of the era where, we're getting out of the Clash as being that album. Clash is late 80s or late 70s rather. I think 1979. This is a decade later, and it's kind of, doesn't sound like the Clash, but it's the same kind of world builder for the type of music that we tend to talk about here. And that, this album wouldn't be on the emo tree, but every band that is whether directly or derivatively influenced. And we're going to talk about a lot of the bands that have been influenced by Pixies. I think that's an even more robust conversation than just discussing this album, which also rules.
I think it's fair to say that this is one of those albums where if it didn't exist, the history of music looks completely different.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that with any exaggeration.
No, it's accurate.
The alternative rise of the 90s and most of the alternative music in the 90s, it's like this album and REM.
Yeah. And it's like because they were so weird and blended so many different styles, like you can see their imprint in a couple different genres. Like, hey, here's the alt rock, here's the grunge, here's the pop punk. You can feel them in all of it because they kind of blended a bunch of different stuff and flamenca and all sorts of weird stuff. They just got really weird with it and just kind of hey, we'll do something good and it doesn't really matter what specifically it sounds like. We'll get into how they kind of came about it, which is, something I've never really been sure they're honest about. They tend to say things and it's like, I don't know if that's true.
It's hard to get straight instead of Frank Black, I feel.
Yes. Black Francis.
Sorry.
Yes.
He's in the Pixies, so it's Black Francis instead.
Yes. Yeah. So before we move on, I feel like I have to say, Jake, actually, it's just Pixies.
It's going to happen all day.
It's
direct influence on Arkells.
So we might slip up at some points and say the Pixies. It's okay because guess who else refers to them as the Pixies all the time? Pixies. So technically the is not a part of their name. They routinely refer to themselves as the Pixies. I even believe they have an album or a B-side or something like that that says the Pixies. Death to the Pixies.
That's the greatest hits record.
There it is. So it's fine.
Yeah.
If we slip up and say the Pixies, Eric Hartman, please don't tweet at us and say, actually, it's just Pixies.
They have t-shirts that say Death to the Pixies all over them.
Yes. By the way, I don't know if Eric Hartman's among them, but if you are one of our listeners who's supporting on Patreon, thank you so much. You can go to patreon.com/Columbia House Party to do that. We've got some bonus.
If Eric's not, we're calling him out by name.
Called out Eric Hartman. Just because, absolutely he's going to timestamp when one of us says the Pixies.
For sure.
And respond in kind. All right. The Pixies. Today we're talking about just a monumentally influential album from 1989. And while the album itself is excellent and worthy of discussion, and we'll discuss it, it best fits this podcast, I think, because of how many other albums we have talked about or will talk about that it touches. In fact, as Jake just said, you could call it one of the most important rock albums of the 80s, one of the most important ever to the alt rock and even pop punk scenes. Today, we're talking about Pixies' second album, Doolittle.
Hips like Cinderella. Must be having a good shame. Talking sweet about nothing. Cookie and picture.
so funky.
Just wakes you up.
It's great. And as loath as I am to not put a killer album opener in that spot, we've got to do a whole thing on the album opener. So Tame is a pretty good. Also, sometimes that's if it's a song that you want to talk about more in depth, don't burn the clip in the open. And Tame's really good.
Tame's a great song.
Tame is like the quintessential quiet loud.
I think Tame's actually the song that made me sort of fall in love with the Pixies, just because it was like, I was definitely to listening to like that kind of music. And it was like, oh, the Pixies, like I know, Gigantic. That's a nice song. And I was like, oh, they sound like this.
Yeah.
Cool.
Also, that's one of the songs where you can most pull their influence from. It's like, oh yeah, this quiet loud that became the standard in alt rock for like a decade.
Backed by just a solid rhythm section. Yeah.
Tame rules. This album rules. Like we mentioned, a lot of the discussion here is going to be about who they influenced and how they influenced. The album itself is very cool. It's there are all sorts of, you even hear it right from that Tame clip right away. There's some funk, there's some jazz, there's some pop, there's a little bit of dance mixed in, all with
there's some hardcore.
Yeah, and there's some hardcore, there's some grungier stuff, pop punk guitar riffs. It's a little all over the place in like the best possible way. So to get to this point, we'll fly through this a little bit because we're going back to the 80s here. Black Francis drops out of UMass after going on an exchange trip to Puerto Rico. It's like, oh, change me. I'm not doing the UMass thing anymore. Moves to Boston, asks his former roommate, Joey Santiago, to start a band. Like, cool. All right, we're doing it. They put out an ad looking for someone who was into Husker Du and Peter, Paul, and Mary. One person replied. It was Kim Deal. Kim Deal had never even played the bass before, became the bassist of the band. For someone who had not played the bass before, could Kim Deal play the bass?
Kim Deal kicks ass.
So through Kim's husband, Dave Lovering was recommended as a drummer. And that's how the band came to be. And I think one of the cool things about how weirdly and kind of off the cuff this was all formed is that each one of these members had different music tastes and a different music background. And you obviously hear that in their sound because it's all over the place and it's blending different elements. So Santiago was pretty straightforward punk, like Black Flag and stuff like that. Deal was more of a folk country background.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, which I think maybe doesn't come through that much in the actual music, but in a lot of how they use harmony, it comes up. And a lot of like the trade vocals.
And like the backing, like uh-huhs and that she does, yeah.
And then Lovering was like kind of a stadium rock guy. And then, Black Francis was all over the place. He grew up with like a lot of gospel music and stuff and then was like, no, give me everything. So you have these people coming from very different places, kind of making this on a whim. They recorded 17 demos. They were all over the place, like alt pop flamenco. Basically, 8 of those became Come On Pilgrim, including Vamos. So Come On Pilgrim was pretty great. Sometimes it gets referred to as their first album. It's not really. On the heels of that, Surfer Rosa, which was also excellent, kind of made them like it moment kids within the media, like, hey, this is coming and this is a thing to keep an eye on. They got multiple nods for Album of the Year. The critical response was positive, but maybe not as loud as you would think, given like how much industry people were keeping an eye on them. Did not do particularly well sales-wise. But it's one of those albums that, hey, it's a new band, kind of a new sound, first album. It put people on notice to pay attention.
Like we've talked about this before, but like I know exactly where I was when I first heard that album.
Surfer Rosa.
Yeah. I remember getting into the band. I remember how I got into the band. Like it was just, I remember hearing that album for the first time in the hallways of my high school. I think I was like 14. It was one of those like, I don't know what this is kind of things, but I loved it. It was so weird and like horny, but also like kind of violent. The Pixies are one of those bands that I think this happens with any important band. The hyperbole kind of gets overdrawn over time. But like there really was sort of nothing like this when it came out. And I remember like as a fan of like Nirvana and pop punk when I was 14 and like understanding there was influence there, but not really getting that because my musical breadth wasn't and knowledge wasn't there yet. But hearing this and like being like, I don't understand this album at all, but I know I really like it.
Yeah. That's a lot of Pixies around the side. So yeah, I don't get it, but it rules.
Yeah.
After that, they signed with Elektra. They switched from Steve Albini as a producer to Gil Norton. Gil Norton, who went on to do Jimmy World, Foo Fighters, Dashboard Confessional, Counting Crows. So between the switch to Norton and a lot more budget, they were able to come up with, a bit of a cleaner sound than on Surfer Rosa. Norton basically like went to school to study Pixie. Sorry, he didn't actually go to school. He like self-imposed couple of weeks studying Pixies, not only to get a feel for their sound and their talents, but also working with Black Francis was sometimes not the easiest, and how to suggest changes to his writing and arrangements was a bit of a delicate thing. He would sometimes push back. He told Rolling Stone, quote, "This record is him trying to make us, shall I say, commercial, and us trying to remain somewhat grunge." So there's a little bit of a back and forth of like, hey, you've got a budget and this producer who we want to work with you to make a commercially successful album. And they're still very young at this point. It's like, well, no, we want to do what we want to do. So there was a little bit of push and pull there. Black Francis also told Esquire in 2014, "We were still young and fresh, but starting to kind of know what we were doing. When we were done with the demos, I think Joey and I felt that, oh yeah, something big happened. We felt confident." So they had a good feeling as they were going through it. They tried to, this is hilarious given what the album sounds like. The goal was to sound simple.
But that's what's so interesting and wonderful about this band. I almost said the Pixies. They are really simple in a lot of ways. Like Joey Santiago's guitar lines are all really like there's no elaborate soloing.
Well, that's why every pop punk band rips them off because they can just play 3 chords.
Yeah, it's all like half of it's like on an acoustic guitar playing 3-4 chords, and it's Joey Santiago doing a simple guitar line over and Kim Deal doing a simple bass line and Lovering just holding it down. But it's also so complicated.
Yeah,
like so
this is why I feel like saying it sounds simple is not. Like component wise, maybe it is, but the general sound you create and the environment you create with this album is not.
Because it's also so chaotic, which is I think adds to it.
The way that they describe their own making of the album relative to what it sounds like is hilarious. Like they compared it to arranging a flower arrangement. It's like that is not what I would.
No.
Not at all. Black Francis listened to a lot of the Beatles and Buddy Holly during the process of writing, just to try to get that, from a storytelling perspective and keeping it tight. However, he kind of went all over the place. Mark Beaumont of Independent described this album as the best Beach Boys album ever made, losing its mind after months trapped in a psychopath's well.
Yeah.
I in researching, I found multiple references to them being like punk Beach Boys.
Interesting.
And I think that's just because like sometimes the bass lines seem like surfery.
Yeah, well, they were always a surf band. Like they have a version of Wave of Mutilation called Wave of Mutilation UK Surf, and it's the same song just done in a surf style.
Album was originally going to be called Whore.
Huh.
The cover is a monkey and a halo surrounded by religious symbols. They worried a little bit if they also called it Whore, it would just like seem too anti-religious instead of just being like surrealist weird. So the artists who did the booklet had access to the lyrics ahead of time, so they built out on that surrealism. And
that's
if
cool.
you ever look at the booklet, I have the vinyl, and if you look through, like there are not subtle, but like there are references to every song. Like obviously the monkey on the cover,
right? There
is a song, "Monkey Gone to Heaven." The monkey in the halo. Like there's a lot of that throughout the album booklet, which is really cool. Lyrically, this is at times a punk record. There are a few commentaries on the state of the environment, things like that. There are also, to your earlier point, just some horny songs. It jumps around a little bit. Black Francis has downplayed the lyrical content as basically just words that fit well together. I don't know if that's necessarily fair to himself, because like there is a political messaging. There's a lot of like biblical and mythological references built into the songs. Like it seems too carefully written to just be random words that fit well.
That being said, though, they are not a band I've ever considered to be like a lyrical heavy band.
Yeah, they're certainly not one where I'm like, oh yeah, that verse meant so much to me.
Yeah.
But it's just like everything seems, I don't know, it's well written for what it is.
It's calculated.
Yeah. He said the intention is to experience it, enjoy it, and be entertained by it, not to like pick the lyrical messages apart. But then when you have a whole song about the earth dying and if we could talk to the animals, we could fix it, you know. So the actual album begins with what I think is one of the best album openers of all time. It sets the album up and the band up perfectly, lets you know exactly who they are, what's coming. I feel like it braces you for any barrier you had up to listening to this album. It's like, you better break that shit down right now, because we're going to get weird and we're going to go all over the place.
I would agree with you. In terms of like top album openers ever, the Pixies are actually first songs are always great. They're a great first song band on record.
The first song on Doolittle is the bass.
I just love how this record sounds.
Yeah.
Like the production of fitting all the instruments together is so well done. Like everything about this record is so well constructed down to the tone of it. Like it just sounds so good.
You know what is less good? Un Chien Andalou.
Yeah, it's not a fun experience.
So
watching.
that song, for anyone who doesn't know, is about a 1929 French-Spanish silent drama from Luis Buñuel and Salvador Dali. It has no conventional plot. The chronology jumps all over the place. It follows what I learned was called a dream logic narrative flow. The scenes are only loosely related, and it is just so weird. You're seeing eyeballs getting...
It's burned into my brain.
I honestly don't want to talk about it that much, because if someone hasn't seen it, it's probably better that they don't hear about all this weird stuff. But the lyrics in Debaser are pretty straightforward about it. Slicing up eyeballs. Want you to know.
Yeah.
So somehow that song became popular. It's an awesome song. Also, that film became popular, which I get less.
Art film school people, man.
Yeah. I mean, look, I like Salvador Dali.
Art.
But
art, Blake.
Black Francis said about this song, it has more to do with rhyming words and getting things to mathematically fit in a nice way in my songs. I don't think about the words too much. I just come up with them, things that just pop into my head. And while I said earlier that I don't believe that for all the tracks on the album, I certainly get it about this one. It's just a killer opener. It's such a great tone setter to let you know what's coming. Tame, which we played earlier, is a lot more up and down, a lot more quiet and loud. It's kind of the benchmark for where things went. In terms of that sound of just, the trading back and forth. It then goes into Wave of Mutilation, which, if the opener wasn't depressing enough for you, it is about Japanese businessmen killing themselves and their entire families. Then the album goes into I Bleed, which is, I think, the best use of Kim Deal as a vocalist on the album. It's the most you hear her, the most prominent you hear her. And, obviously we can't play clips of all of these songs. The album probably.
I mean, it's funny. It's actually funny going through. I have the track list in front of me right now. The first 9 songs on this album are all notable and like instantly recognizable. Like they weren't all hits and they weren't all singles, but it's one of those albums that's so ingrained in like the consciousness that it takes you till track 10 to be like, oh, do I know this song?
Yeah.
But everyone's like, oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I told you before we came on that this is the most notes I've had, and a lot of it is just because like normally we pick a couple songs to talk about, and I was like, I have thoughts on all of them.
Right, because there's so much to say.
One that we will talk about a little bit more is one that has been referred to by Black Francis as hobo film noir.
Outside there's a boxcar waiting. Outside the family store. Out by the fire breathing. Outside we wait till face turns blue. I know the nervous walking. I know the dirty bed hangs. Out by the boxcar waiting. Take me way to nowhere place. There is a wait so long. You never wait so long. Here comes a man. Here comes a man. Here comes your man. Big shake on the boxcar moving. Big shake to the land that's falling down. Is a wind makes a palm stop blowing. A big storm falling break my crown. There is a wait so long. You never wait so long. Here comes a man. Here comes a man. Here comes a
I was saying earlier about how the first time I heard this band, I was like, I don't get it, but I love it. I remember the first time I heard Doolittle, and like the first 4 songs are like loud or at least violent. And then this song happened. I was like, because it was in those days of like burning your own CDs from
Yeah.
like whatever you found on LimeWire or whatever. And I remember being like, is this the right song?
Are they covering someone else? Did someone
Yeah.
else cover this, and that's the version of Here Comes Your Man that I've heard before?
That's exactly it. It's a song that feels like I've known it forever, but I hadn't.
It is 30 years old.
But
But when you
yes.
first came across it, yeah.
I was 14. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure I had heard it maybe, but I don't know where.
So this song
tiny.
almost didn't make the album. This has come up a couple times in our podcast where like a what if scenario. So he began writing this when he was 15. It's basically about hobos on a train dying in an earthquake. It was of the 17 demos that they did that they pulled 8 for Come On Pilgrim from. It was one of those 17 and did not get pulled.
Really?
He was hesitant and reluctant about releasing it and then said, quote, people have been telling us to record it ever since, so we finally did. So naturally, it becomes their kind of breakthrough song. The mix of, the groovy bass line. San Diego used a 12 string for that, which
Interesting.
is cool. And then you're, trading the throaty vocals with the melody. It's a great song.
Yeah.
They initially would not play it live because they felt it was too far removed from what they are. So to your point about how it kind of stands out as, is this
Yeah.
wrong?
Like it sounds like a pop standard almost. Like
Yes.
it could be, if you're making like your Beach Boys Beatles comparison, this is the song to look to.
Yes, absolutely. It's the most surfery song.
Yeah.
So it was too far removed from what they are. Now, since they've gotten back together, it's one of their favorites to play in concert because obviously it's a big hit and people want to hear it. And
Yeah. I've seen them 6 or 7 times and I think I've heard it every show.
Joe Dolan of Spin called it the most accessible song ever by an underground type band, which is a smart, I don't think they did it this calculated, but it's a pretty smart approach to getting someone to check you out. If there's this is the accessible song, but you also have cred as like an underground punk / grunge adjacent band, this is a good way to hook people in and hear what you're about.
It's also really well sequenced on
Mhm.
the album too. Like if we're looking at this from a vinyl perspective, this is like, I think there's 2 or 3 songs after this on side A. And so you're just kind of like getting into it and then this hits and it's like, oh, there's the single.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's terrible karaoke version of it in 500 Days of Summer.
Look, if you think that didn't influence me singing this at karaoke a lot in university, I got bad news for you.
I had a feeling. I had a feeling. From there, the album goes into Monkey Gone to Heaven, which is obviously it's referenced on the album art, which is adorable if you don't know what it's about. I love the progression of if humans are 5, then the devil is 6. If the devil is 6, then God is 7. You have this throaty bridge. They use violins and cellos on this song. This is Monkey Gone to Heaven.
There was a guy an underwater guy who controlled the sea. Got killed by 10 million pounds of sludge from New York and New Jersey. This one is gone to heaven. 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 Creature in the sky got sucked in a hole. Now there's a hole in the sky, and the ground's not cold. And if the ground's not cold, everything is gonna burn. Well, I'll take turns. I'll get mine too. This one is gone to heaven. 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 This one is gone to heaven.
It's so funny. It's right. Love that too.
Yeah, I love the.
I can say that about
I love
every
what
song.
it builds to too.
Yeah.
Just the
Oh, the shouty bridge you were just talking about is and like seeing them in concert, it's one of the best like concert moments. Everyone puts up their hands and counts the thing.
You know it's coming, and
Yeah.
the 5, 6, 7, and it just progresses super well. From there, it goes into Mr. Greaves, which is the song that I mentioned kind of earlier. That is the most, I guess, political because it is directly about the environment dying. Mr. Greaves is what he calls death, and there is the hope for Doolittle, where the album title comes from. If he could connect mankind and the animal world, then we might get some answers to this, but that won't happen, so we're doomed. He told Esquire, "It's ecological, but it's in the spirit or category of mythology. Maybe not a specific one, but I do reference Neptune or Neptuna's daughter. There's a loose reference there. It's kind of end of the world nuclear reference in a science fiction way almost," which makes it sound like he doesn't really know. That's a very beating around the bush, chasing your tail kind of explanation of how he wrote that song. The chorus in that song also has a really cool pitch change. Which,
Yes, it does.
There is a song that is not very nice on this album called Crackety Jones. It's kind of like this intense chase scene kind of song. It's just like, it's very...
Jose Jones.
Yes.
I love that song.
There's a lot going on. Anyway, that was written about a former college roommate of his.
Huh.
And it is not very kind to that person. He has since said, "I think I have a lot more patience and understanding about mental health issues now as a middle-aged man. But when you're young and you run into that, especially when it's intimate, like when you're living with someone, it can freak you out. I think now I would have a more nurturing attitude about it." I hope so, because that song's not really very nice to your roommate.
But if you're going to
I know something about terrible roommates. And
if there's going to be a song to open up your circle pit, though,
yes,
you could do worse than Crackety Jones.
Yes. And then the album goes into La La Love You, which has some very like The Cure. I hear a lot of Alkaline Trio in this album.
That's interesting. 'Cause
Yeah.
you've said this to me before, and I don't know if I don't, in this song a little bit. Yeah. But I don't know if I completely agree. I'm sure they took them as an influence because they're that age and that era. But it's an interesting comparison.
Yeah. This song and Gouge Away are the two where I kind of hear Alkaline Trio in it a little bit, or like where, Alkaline Trio may have built from.
Yeah.
And maybe I was trying to force it as I was listening
I
to
don't
it.
think so, but I think it's also fair to say that like if you pick any sort of like pop punk band that started in the 90s, I think you could probably count this as an influence.
And we're going to do that after this. So, this album, people thought it was going to be good and big enough that they toured in support of U2 on the Zoo TV tour.
Really?
And Bono called them one of America's greatest bands ever.
Wow.
Which is a pretty good endorsement for your, as they've been called, underground-ish band,
Especially
to get a wider audience.
Especially in like 1990.
Yes. That's a big endorsement. Not only the tour support, but Bono being like, no, these guys rule. The album, Doolittle, hit number 8 on the UK albums chart. It had mostly positive reviews. Peter Kane of Q said it was carefully structured noise and straightforward, rhythmic, insistent, makes perfect sense. Rolling Stone had it as number 10 album of the year. Sounds and Melody Maker both had it at number 2. NME had it at number 4. I mean, those are obviously very great rankings. Historically, it takes on even greater ranking. Panorama called it the number 1 album from 1970 to 1998, which is a very specific range of time.
But also like every classic album ever.
Pitchfork had it at number 4 album of the 80s. It was number 36 on Spin's 100 best albums from 1985 to 2005, which again, a weird time frame. I'm sure they did that in 2005 and we're just like, hey.
I feel like when like publications do that, it's like when I do it, just like I've been listening to these albums a lot. I want to talk about them.
Yeah. From a singles perspective, Monkey Gone to Heaven hit the rock charts. It peaked at number 5 on the US Billboard Modern Rock chart. Here Comes Your Man was the second single. It hit number 3 on the Billboard and it charted in the UK, which Monkey Gone to Heaven hadn't charted as well in the UK. Debaser was originally a big like indie club song. It did not become a single until 1997 when they released the compilation album called Death to the Pixies.
Interesting.
Yes.
Huh.
The album has since gone platinum in the UK and the US. In terms of reviews, there is a very funny Metacritic, which, you don't want to look at these too much. In 2014, on December 4th, 2 people reviewed this album on Metacritic at the same time and reviewed it as if like they had just found it. The first says, I just don't like this kind of music. Nothing personal. But however, I guess this is a good album. Not the best there's around, but still a nice one if you like such a thing. Which is just some kind of...
That's like the most internet, just like, then you don't have to say this.
Yeah. The other one's even better. Also, the fact that 2 people reviewed it on the same day in 2014.
That's very weird.
Yeah. Crap, just like most of the modern songs nowadays, it just doesn't differentiate from any other modern song. It's the same crap you hear every day, everywhere. Well, buddy, let me tell you why the things today sound like Pixies. It's not because Pixies are making music that sounds like today's music. It's because everyone was influenced by this shit.
We sort of touched on this with a little bit with the Weaker Thans about how like all our favorite bands, like your favorite band's favorite band kind of situation.
Yes. This
is like... that times a billion. Every single modern rock band has taken something from the Pixies, whether direct or not.
Oh, it's sometimes extremely direct. Before we get into that, we just have one more thing to wrap up on the album side. We talked about Debaser as a killer album opener.
Yes.
I also think Gouge Away is a killer closer.
Gouge away. You can gouge away. Stay all day if you want to.
So that is my favorite song on the album.
Mine too.
Really?
I will go on record and say I think that's the best Pixies song.
Interesting. I'm very surprised we had the same number one.
I am too. You said before we started recording, you were like, "Oh, we might have some controversy. I don't know if my take is hot," and I don't know if it is either.
Yeah,
but
I did not
agree.
look up like people ranking.
No, nor did I.
The song, so I would assume.
I assume because if you look it up, it's all just going to be "Here Comes Your Man" and "Debaser."
Yeah, which
fair.
I mean, hey, they were two very big songs for a reason. "Here Comes Your Man" is like, it's not one of my. Obviously, its importance is enormous. It's not one of my favorite ones on the album to just like fire up.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, I don't think I have it in the top.
It's
3.
also so ubiquitous now that it's like it can't be one of my top 3, not because it's bad, but just because like you hear it all the time.
Yeah, we've run into it a couple times where sometimes I feel like a song, the phrase we use, insists upon itself.
Yes.
And I don't feel like that it would, like where Sugar We're Going Down, for example, I'm like, oh, that's one of my favorites because it's just, it has to be.
Yeah.
I don't feel that way about Here Comes Your Man.
No,
and
I agree.
Maybe it's because I come to this album after, like obviously it came out in
No, but I think I
1989. was a
agree
child.
with you. I don't think it's a lesser song or anything.
No,
but
no.
I know what you mean, that it's not a song like, oh, that has to be our pick for a song.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes. So we agree Gouge Away is the top song. What are your other faves?
I mean, I have so much love for so many of like sort of the random songs on this record. It's not on my list, but I want to put There Goes My Gun on because I think it's so fun.
Also, like I love how it almost like parallels Here Comes Your Man. I just like that it's like an A and a B.
Yeah. I think my number 2 is probably Hey.
That's on my list as well.
Yeah. I think I'd probably go Gouge Away at 1, Hey at 2. I have a real soft spot for number 13, baby.
Okay.
I saw them on their first reunion tour in 2004. They played 2 nights at Arrow Hall, and I knew them. And like I knew Surfer Rosa, Come on Pilgrim front to back. I wasn't as familiar with Doolittle for some reason. Like
Okay.
I knew like some of the songs, but I think my first Pixies records I had were Surfer Rosa, Come on Pilgrim, and Death to the Pixies. So like the singles were big.
Okay.
And I remember they played number 13 and I was like, what the fuck is this? And I immediately went home and like figured out what song it was and listened to it. So yeah, I think I would go Gouge Away, Hey, number 13, then probably Debaser, and then round out a top 5, probably Wave of Mutilation.
Oh, we have 4 of the same top 5.
All right.
That's great. I have Debaser a little higher. And Monkey Gone Heaven be my number 5.
There's only one song on this record I don't really like.
Yeah.
And you could really...
And even then it's fine. It's
Yeah.
just like,
I just forget.
you're not going to skip anything on this
I
album.
just forget it's on the album. Like when I saw them play Doolittle front to back, they started playing it and I was like, is this... Because when they did Doolittle live, they opened the show, the first like 4 or 5 songs in the set were the B-sides from Doolittle. So they opened with like 5 sort of unknown tunes or lesser known tunes because they just reissued it with all the B-sides.
Oh yeah, the Wikipedia entry of like the reissues and
It's
how many songs are on each is like,
ridiculous.
yeah, this album now has like 80 songs.
I think they opened with doing the Manta Ray.
Okay.
Which is, so they did like the 5 B-sides and then Debaser was like song 6 and they played it front to back, closed with Gouge Away, then did an encore of like 4
other
Pixies songs. But I remember when they got to Silver, which is the song I don't love, it was like, oh, did they insert another B-side into the set? And then I had to be like, oh no, this is on the record.
Yeah.
I just forgot about it.
I think this makes picking a song for the mixtape pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
We have the same favorite song and it's
I'm
not a
shocked.
single.
I thought that this was going to be this one was going to be a debate.
No, I feel like Debaser is the most important song off the album, or like the best encapsulation of what it is. But if we both agree Gouge Away is the best song and it's not a single, like that makes this pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think so.
Gouge Away to the mixtape.
I'm fine with that. I love that song.
All right, so the aftermath of this album is maybe not the best.
No.
Maybe not the best. In Fool the World, the oral history of a band called Pixies, it is revealed that Frances threw a guitar at Kim Deal at a concert in Germany, and she subsequently refused to play a show. Obviously, that is an awful, awful thing. Outside of that, there was just a lot of tension about Deal wanting to have more of a voice in the band and the band to play some of her songs, which, she accepted at one point. I think she said, she accepted her role, but the relationship was kind of frayed. They didn't really talk a ton. It wasn't just the relationship with Deal and Black Francis. As he told Reuters in 2013, I regret it, but maybe something else would have caused it eventually. I wish the manager or someone at the record company would have been a little more tuned into the dynamics of a young band being on the road and making records, someone to advise a different schedule, or maybe say, hey, you guys are like due for a vacation right about now, or hey, you all do your solo projects and come back. We never really got that sort of common sense advice or at least I was too stoned to hear it. They go on hiatus, return for Trompe le Monde, then break up in 1993. They reunite in 2003. Kim Deal has had some success in the interim with the Breeders. She leaves the band in 2013, but under better terms. The band kind of said she's welcome back when her work with the Breeders allows. That hasn't really been the case. They replaced her and then replaced the replacement. This is what the Breeders sounded like, Kim Deal's side thing. So outside of just the influence of Pixies, Kim Deal has had a huge influence as well. And this is maybe better saved for an episode on the Breeders. But, I mean, to have this prominent female bassist and then eventually a front woman who was, you know, a vocal and kind of eventually iconic feminist had a big impact. Eva Hendricks of Charlie Bliss told The Cut in 2018, there are bands where you're like, my life was never the same after I found them. And for me, the Breeders are that. Kim changed everything. I think if you dug, and if we do a Breeders episode, you'll see a ton of that.
Yeah.
I would imagine. Kim Deal told The Guardian in 2018, there are so many women that I respect and admire. One good thing about the internet is that it can be a huge democratized space for women on women, women with women, new women. It's not just dudes covering dudes and dudes supporting dudes. You know, the dude list is about dudes for dudes. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it's the only list, it can be a little minimizing. I've said before that misogyny is the actual backbone of the music industry. And without misogyny, the music industry would crumble. She's been obviously very vocal about this kind of stuff. And I think
it's a good ass quote.
Not to speak for her, but the fact that she's been able to have that influence is probably really, you know, a hugely rewarding part of her career.
And I'm sure like being in a band like Pixies with the relationship and like the dynamic there probably influenced a lot of that. Like Black Francis' response to her being, hey, play more of my songs, where on the next two records, every single song was written and performed by Black Francis. And he was like, his response was like, no.
Yeah.
It was
also, here's a guitar at your dome.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I think she's a very important voice, and I think she's been doing it now for so long that it's like, she is like those forerunner, like her and like Kim Gordon come to mind to me as like at least in rock, as like prominent, important voices.
Now, Pixies as a band, the musical influence is obvious. They always shoot down their influence, but it's pretty inarguable. Here's how Joey Santiago told WBUR Radio in 2018. This is kind of their perspective on maybe they didn't really have that much of an influence. Maybe it's coincidence. He said, music moves forward. It was the right combination of people to make that kind of music with different influences. We're one of the signposts like Sonic Youth and Husker Du, whom we were influenced by. It's a pretty modest approach to it. I guess you kind of have to be.
Yeah, but also like the famous quote of like Kurt Cobain said that Smells Like Teen Spirit was just him trying to rip off the Pixies.
It sure was. So, Nirvana's Nevermind came out 2 years later. Which, by the way, the fact that Nevermind came out 2 years after Doolittle, those bands do not hold the same timeline space in my head.
Right.
It doesn't. It feels like that's a long 2 years.
So everything was happening. Like everything was changing then too.
Smells Like Teen Spirit, a song you may have heard before, was Kurt Cobain's attempt to write a Pixies song. As he told Rolling Stone, I was trying to write the ultimate pop song. I was basically trying to rip off the Pixies. I have to admit it. When I heard the Pixies for the first time, Kurt, it's just Pixies. When I heard the Pixies for the first time, I connected with that band so heavily that I should have been in that band, or at least a Pixies cover band. We used their sense of dynamics, being soft and quiet, and then loud and hard. Dave Grohl told Slate, the quiet, loud dynamic that's dominated alternative radio for the last 14 years can be attributed to one and only one band, the Pixies. That's a quote. I'm not going to keep doing this, I promise. So, as much as Pixies have downplayed their influence, the Nirvana thing was something they were willing to cop to. Black Francis was asked about their contribution to rock in general by Reuters in 2013, and he said, being original, influencing Nirvana so they could rip a song, I'll admit it. If Kurt Cobain fessed up to it, fuck it. I'll agree with it. You ripped us off.
The quiet, loud dynamic thing I find so interesting too, because at least for you and I, being the age we are, it's one of those dynamics that's just like, you don't think of it as coming from somewhere. It's just music.
Yeah, it's just how you would do it.
Yeah, but it had to come from somewhere, and it's wild. It, like, you can say this about any genre that has like a formative style or moment, but it's just so like quiet verse, loud chorus is what, like for me growing up was just like, oh, that's what music sounds like. Mm-hmm. But then to think that a band actually had to like start that,
do that, because before everyone would be, you're the same tempo and
you
energy.
have a loud song or a quiet song, and that's how it works.
If you dig in, you can hear this in Smashing Pumpkins. You can hear it in Weezer, Modest Mouse, Blur borrowed a lot from them. The Strokes, when the Strokes came along.
Everyone is that's what's crazy about it.
Yes. And now the coolest thing I think is like, obviously you feel this wave on the 90s alt rock and grunge scenes, and it's more A to B, like direct causation, the influence. But then you get to the era we've discussed the most, which is kind of like the pop punk and emo explosion of the early 2000s. And on the pop punk side of that, you hear a ton of Pixies still. And a lot of it is, the simplicity of the guitar and the bass lines. Like, there are bands that are like, oh yeah, the first song that guy learned on the guitar was Pixies, and he just like kept playing that. I don't know, maybe you've heard this song before.
I took her out, it was a Friday night. I woke alone to get the feeling right. We started making out and she took off my pants, but then I turned on the TV, and that's about the time she walked away from me. Nobody likes you when you're 23, and I still more abuse my TV shows. What the hell is ADD? My friends say I should act my age. What's my age? That's about the time that she broke up with me. No one should take themselves so seriously, with many years ahead to fall in line. Why would you wish down on me? I never wanna act my age. What's my age again? What's my age again? What's my age again?
It's funny. I've never made the Pixies connection to that song
It's
specifically.
right out of the bass.
It's right there. You're 100% correct.
It's right
It's
there.
a simple guitar line, a bass coming in. Like, it's right there.
So Blink-182 also embraced the, hey, we're just going to write stuff. It doesn't need to mean anything. It doesn't need to say anything. We're just like Black Francis's quote about like, just find lyrics that fit. I believe it when Mark Hoppus and Tom DeLonge say that on some songs like What's My Age Again. Blink obviously stayed away from the, the political commentary side of that.
Hey, Anthem Part 2 exists.
It's true. And aliens exist.
We really need to see this through.
Yes.
Kids can't vote. Adults elect them. It's deep.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Also, Tom just telling us that aliens are here.
I guess he was right.
Yeah.
To the stars.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Mark Hoppus actually made his DJing debut in 2015 at Taking Back Tuesday, the LA emo night that has come up a couple times. He played 2 Blink songs, which I thought was, yeah. I mean, I guess you have to, like, if someone's going out to see Mark Hoppus DJ at emo night, like, you probably want to hear some Blink songs. He also played Where's My Mind off Surfer Rosa. So, just it's right there. It's on his playlist.
Mark, you've also seen Fight Club.
Yes, that's kind of the iconic use of that song as well. I won't play this, but as I was but I was like trying to, basically I have a couple examples queued up like that Blink-182 one of bands borrowing a little from Pixies, and I was trying to think if I was missing any big ones, and I came across a ridiculous supercut that I sent you on Facebook, that Vimeo video of Avicii, Pixies, Blink 182, Linkin Park, and Kings of Leon all mashed
It
together.
sure sounds like something.
Yeah.
It's definitely a sound.
I won't play it. If you could DM me after this or message me and I will send you what I'm talking about.
You could also just Google those 4 bands together. It's all that's going to come up.
It is, it's out there. For whatever reason you are listening to this podcast and don't love the pop punk genre or whatever, you want a weightier name who was influenced by Pixies or to vouch for Pixies. How about David fucking Bowie? So David Bowie, when he had his side like noise rock project Tin Machine.
Oh, Tin Machine kick ass.
They covered Debaser and Cactus.
Really?
Yeah. YouTube the David Bowie cover of Debaser.
Okay.
It's great. He also, this is a quote from David Bowie, I found the Pixies just about the most compelling music outside of Sonic Youth in the entire 1980s. I always thought there was a psychotic Beatles in them.
Yeah, I think that's Psychotic Beatles sounds like
Psychotic
right.
Beatles is better than if Beach Boys went punk.
Yeah, I think so.
Psychotic
Beatles, that's great.
I love it. Bowie.
Of course Bowie was on it.
Yeah. And covering it in like I think Tin Machine was like early 90s. So
Yeah.
like that's not like a way later like nostalgic cover. That's a like, no, this song rips and I'm covering
I could be
it.
getting my Bowie chronology wrong, but I believe that Tin Machine was his like drifting into rock, which led him into his industrial phase when he started touring with 9 Inch Nails and making whatever the album that I'm Afraid of Americans is on. I forget what it's called. His early 90s is like very rock. And also Reed Gabriels is the guitarist in Tin Machine, and now he's the guitarist for The Cure. Reed Gabriel kicks ass.
Sure.
We should do a Tin Machine episode. I love Tin Machine.
Let's do a Cure episode too.
Well, we will do a Cure episode.
Several.
Yeah.
Thanks guys for listening. Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, man. It was fun.
Please try the fish.